Good evening, everybody. We're here at the Northeastland Hotel in Presque Isle for the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine, Aroostook County Conservation Association, Whitetail Deer Collaborative. We're going to have Jerry McLaughlin, Nate Webb, Jerry Levine, and David Trahan, and we're going to be talking about the deer wintering area collaborative that's going to happen up here in Aroostook County. We're also going to talk about the any deer permit restructuring, and we will be going to that conference very shortly. Stay tuned, everybody.
Make the camera small these days.
Yeah, but it shows up nice and big when you watch it. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. They do it well. Well, David, that's what we're here for. We're here to hopefully answer some of those questions for you. If anybody has any questions and comments on the live feed, go ahead and leave them in the comments. And if we can't get them addressed tonight in the conference here, we'll address them individually in the post a little bit later on. Thank you, everybody.
Can you hear me? All right, awesome. So, time we get started. My name is David Trahan. I'm the Executive Director of the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. Former legislator, I served 12 years, almost 12 years in the Maine legislature, 2 terms as a state senator and 4 terms as a state representative. In all of those years, I served on the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee. And I think all but one of those years I served as the Republican lead, which is the minority's equivalent of the chair of the committee. Over that span of time, like you, I saw the state of Maine change dramatically as it relates to whitetail deer. In the mid-1980s, 85, what is that, Jerry Levine, are you here?
Nope.
There you are. In the mid-1980s, the state of Maine developed Antlers deer permits to try to bring the deer herd back. And over those decades since, the deer population in southern Maine has thrived. The opposite is true of northern, eastern, and western Maine. For many hunters, they don't leave their traditional hunting areas. Down on the coast where I live, we are spoiled. Our hunting season in the southern part of the state begins in September. You can hunt in these expanded archery zones, which you can shoot as many deer as you want. And then you have your October archery season, in which you can shoot an antlerless deer without a permit. You can have multiple permits and hunt through November, like we did last year. I think I had 4. And then you can hunt 2 weeks in December. We have a lot of deer, and in a typical season, I'll see 25 or 30 deer. Now, for some of those folks that are listening that live in northern Maine, you're lucky sometimes to see a deer. Tracks, I know because I have a camp up in the Jackman area, and we have very few deer up there. So really, we're spoiled along the coast. Jerry Levine was the architect of that doe permit system that was so effective in keeping a deer population in check. Nate Webb, who's sitting here, runs this program for the state. They're doing a good job, and we have a healthy deer population in southern Maine. But we dramatically need to do something in northern, eastern, and western Maine. I understand that. I am 59 years old. I saw what it looked like when we had deer in northern Maine. It was a major part of the economy. We were a draw for hunters around the country, and it has since changed because of predation, habitat loss, and I think really a failure to prioritize the importance of whitetail deer. I believe we've lost our deer herd across northern Maine. Well, a couple of years ago, after almost 20 years, over 20 years of trying, I was successful in changing the Land for Maine's Future program to include the purchase of deer wintering areas in the region. In addition to that, through intense negotiations with both leadership from the Democrats and Republicans, we were able to secure a $40 million appropriation to be used, a portion of that, by deer yards. Now, why that's important for 2 reasons is, and I'm going to point to the map in a moment, is that not only is that $40 million available over 4 years, it is matched by federal and state and other funds to a 3-to-1 match. That means, do the math, $160 million over 4 years will be likely spent for the Land for Maine's Future program. Now, this is, I'm going to move over to the map because this is why this is so important. Up until recently, well, this first of all is a map that Inland Fisheries and Wildlife uses. The shaded areas where they want to increase the deer herd. Down here is where we have such a strong deer population. This is a map of all the deer, not the deer yards, but all of the land domain's future projects and purchases. What do you see? Most of the LMF projects are in the southern half of the state. And we failed to make major purchases under the LMF program in this region where we so dramatically need by deer yards. So why that policy was so important is now the department is directed, and we will be looking at making conservation purchases throughout this region, particularly deer yards. So I wanted to illustrate for you, this is where the department wants to bring the deer back, and this is where I believe we fail as policymakers to invest in this. Now that doesn't mean there isn't other conservation land here, because there is. But now the LMF program will start buying these parcels in this region. So in lieu of that great victory, we did not stop. I worked with Jerry Levine, worked with the agency with me to try to restructure the antlerless deer permit system. And what they did was they came up with a new system, and I want to spend a lot of time talking about it. But I do want to talk about a new revenue stream that is now available. Under that new system, in southern Maine, where I hunt, now going to be able to shoot 2 deer. The first one a buck, and then if I apply for a doe permit and get it, got to pay $12 for that permit. So now I can shoot 2 deer. But that $12 goes into the deer management account that is specifically to buy deer yards, manage predation, and improve habitat. I worked with Nate and with Jerry, and I believe we built a fund in state law that can be a major component of restoring the deer herd. So now you have the LMF money, and how much does that generate a year with the antlers? 800,000.
Yeah, we're anticipating between about 700,000 and
why that is also important is that also gets matched 3-to-1 in federal dollars. So we're going to get into the details of how this is all set up in a moment. I want to introduce Nate and speak for a minute, and then I'm going to introduce Jerry. I did speak for a minute. And then at the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about a way in which the people of Aroostook County can engage in a way, take ownership, and assist in the restoration of whitetail deer. So with that, Nate, all yours.
Sure, thanks, David. I want to start by introducing a few of our department staff here. And you probably all know Tom Ward, Lieutenant Ashland with the Warden Service. And Amanda Muse, one of our regional biologists in the Ashland office. And we do have a couple other staff who are hoping to make it tonight, but due to illnesses and other reasons they weren't here. There's a few things that David asked me to talk about with you all this evening. The first was just kind of going over the history of what we tried to do with deer yards prior to this more recent effort, going back to some of our historic efforts. We actually started working on deer wintering area conservation in the 1950s and 60s. During that time frame, we did a pretty intensive inventory and survey across all of northern, western, and down east Maine, as well as under the central Maine, surveying for deer during wintertime, during periods of deep snow when deer were yarded up to try to figure out where those deer yards were. That led to a few different efforts. One of those was entering into cooperative agreements with industrial forest landowners. So those are essentially voluntary agreements that we enter into with various companies to promote the long-term management of habitat for deer, wintering area protection and enhancement. The other element to that in the unorganized towns is actually regulatory. So in the 70s and 80s, through the Land Use Regulatory Commission, which is now LUPC, there were about just about 175,000 acres of deer wintering area that were mapped through that law. And what happens on those acres whenever the landowner wants to harvest one of those areas, they have to consult with our staff and develop what we call a plan agreement to lay out how that harvest will happen and hopefully long-term conservation of habitat for deer. I did mention the cooperative agreement areas as well. Those often overlap with and go beyond the extent of those regulated acres. In total, we have, as I mentioned, about 175,000 acres of mapped deer wintering areas in unorganized towns. We have about 645,000 acres of mapped deer wintering areas organized now. So those, importantly, those acres are not regulated in any way. There is a process by which we can comment to the Department of Environmental Protection when they're considering development permit applications on those areas, but there's no formal requirement for the landowner to engage with our agency when they're looking at actually managing or conducting timber harvest on those acres. Again, many of them do cooperative agreements, but there's no requirement. So again, we have a long history of using various regulatory and non-regulatory tools to try to promote the conservation of deer wintering areas. And I think probably everyone in this room is sort of familiar with the challenges that we faced in promoting and enhancing the deer population up in this part of the state. We have a lot of landowners that we work very closely with, and we've had a lot of success. But what we found, and I think Gary will talk about this a little bit more, we just don't have the number of acres that we actively manage with deer habitat as the priority that we need to sustain the population of deer that we all like to see in this part of the state. There are some other elements to our program. We do quite a bit of technical assistance to private landowners, essentially providing advice on how they can manage their land base to promote shelter for deer during the winter. We also continue to do pretty intensive surveys and assessment of deer wintering areas with Forest Service pilots, with Forest Service pilots. Most winters when the snow conditions are appropriate, and keep track of where the deer are wintering and update those maps as appropriate as deer distribution changes. I think most of you are probably aware, and many of you probably participate in our predation management program. We do have a fairly substantial predation management program using funds from the deer management funds to contract with individuals like some of the folks in this room to remove coyotes from priority deer wintering areas. We certainly have seen some success there in some cases, but there is not a large sort of landscape level coyote removal that occurs. Those are targeted efforts that many of you are familiar with. So that's kind of the history of our program. It's deer wintering area conservation in this part of the state. It is a department priority. We've invested a significant amount of staff time over the years, a significant amount of funding from your license fees and from federal funding sources. Our primary funding source, as David mentioned, for most of our work is David Robertson funds. Those are excise taxes on guns, ammunition, archery equipment. They fund about 60 to 70% of the work that we do with wildlife biologists in this state. All of our deer wintering area work in conjunction with license fees. So we have taken this effort seriously over time, but I think we can all agree we haven't achieved the success that we would like to have seen when that effort started back in the 50s and 60s. So that kind of takes us to today and this new opportunity that we have for our agency to actually purchase and manage deer wintering areas in northern, western, and eastern Maine with deer as top priority. We have an IF&W about 110, 112,000 acres of wildlife management areas. Over most of those, similar to this map here, are actually down in the southern third to the half of the state, where most of the residents of Maine live. We have a few management areas up in this neck of the woods, but a relatively small percentage are up this way. And very, very few of our wildlife management areas have deer wintering areas on them. And really none of them were acquired with that as the primary purpose or reason for acquisition. So this new effort that really started a couple years ago with the legislature, with David and Jerry on some new language for LMF and the Deer Management Fund, it's really a new opportunity, and it's a path that we've never gone down. It's a tool that we've never really used, that being state ownership of deer wintering areas by the State Fish and Wildlife Agency. We're pretty excited about it. We have a lot of flexibility to manage our land base that most other landowners don't have. We can manage with wildlife, and we do manage with wildlife as the absolute top priority. We can do management techniques at a financial loss. We're really aren't concerned really at all about generating revenue. That is a side benefit in many cases. But because of that federal funding we have, the Pittman Robertson funding, we can go in and do a management action and incur a substantial cost and not recoup that from the stumpage that we would receive from whatever harvest is occurring. We also can manage on a very long-term time horizon. We don't have investors. Our investors are all of you, the state of Maine. And again, we're not looking for financial return. So we have the ability to really think long-term, decades into the future, and to, again, to do some management techniques that just aren't practical for most private landowners. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of the process that we go through. If you want me to cover that now, David. We are state government, so nothing's simple and straightforward. Everything's complicated and red tape. That just goes without saying. And we have federal funding, which comes with its own red tape, but we're pretty good at working through that. There are some, certainly some limitations, though. One of the limitations that we have for the end of any of the funding sources that we have available to us is that we have to have the property appraised and we cannot pay more than appraised value. And that at times can be a challenge, especially right now when it's just all over the place and appraisal haven't adjusted. So that is a limitation that sometimes can cause projects to not move forward as the appraisal just don't come in where the landowner might want them to be expected to get based on what they might get from a private sale. We also have to go through a pretty extensive due diligence process. We have to make sure that any land that we acquire has guaranteed public access. We can't buy some property that none of you can get to do so. But we have to go through a pretty extensive sort of legal title review to make sure that what access is in place and there's no potential for there to be a problem with that down the road. We also have to kind of cobble together all the various funding sources. David mentioned the LMF fund. That fund requires at least 50% match from some other source. The federal fund that we use requires at least 25% match. The new funding in the Deer Management Fund actually doesn't require any match. That can be used as a match for because of other two sources. So at times it can take us, once we've entered into an agreement with a landowner to purchase a property, it can take us sometimes months to sort of cobble all those various funding sources together and actually sale and transaction. So those are just some of the things that we have to work through. Some of them are pretty challenging. All of them sort of add up to a fairly lengthy process. We're not an entity that can just go buy a property. It takes us time to do that due diligence and make sure everything is in place. And again, at the end of the day, we use public funds to buy public property, so there's a lot of due diligence required to ensure that that's appropriate. In terms of what sort of our vision is and what we're looking for, we're a pretty small agency. We have about 50 staff in the wildlife division. We have a lands program that manages those wildlife management areas that has actually now 3 full-time staff. One of the other aspects of this initiative is we did get a new dedicated position to work specifically on the acquisition and management of the areas, but we're still relatively limited to those 3 staff, supplemented by the regional biologists that we have scattered around the state in our 7 regional offices. So what that means is that we can't buy everything and we can't manage a lot of small parcels. We really need to focus our efforts on larger properties where we can efficiently use our staff time and our resources to manage on a fairly large scale. That doesn't mean that we're never interested in a smaller property, but it's got to be the right fit. It really has to be kind of a gem for us to consider something that's less than several hundred acres. For this effort, really our focus is on properties of 1,000 acres. We're having some conversations with various landowners about properties that are in the 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 acre range, and ideally that's what we're looking at in most cases. I will say that in this part of sort of eastern Aroostook County, that's a little bit different. They're just on those big chunks of intact deer running area complexes that we might see further west. So the scale at which we would look to acquire properties up here is smaller. western Maine or western Aroostook County. What our goal is with these properties, certainly the winter shelter, the heavy conifer cover is a critical component, but we are really looking for a very long-term landscape level management approach. We're interested in more than just the core shelter. What we would like to be able to do is manage the entire property at sort of a landscape level for year-round habitat and do things like food plots, apple trees, all those things that make the property attractive to deer year-round, that allow them to go into the winter in the best possible condition, hopefully survive at a higher rate than they might otherwise. So that requires, big chunks of lands, and that's what we're looking for the most part, again, with some exceptions. We do anticipate that predation management is going to be part of the equation. The properties that we acquire, we will look to likely do some predation management through our existing program. We do anticipate that, at least in the short term, there may be cases where supplemental feeding is required to help facilitate deer reuse of some of these areas that maybe they haven't been using for quite some time. That's something that we hope doesn't have to be a widespread or a long-term effort, but it is a management tool that we'll consider where appropriate. One of the first things that we'll do with these properties as we acquire them is working with our regional wildlife staff and this new wintering area biologist that we have, is develop a management plan for the property, and that will lay out our long-term vision for managing the property, both in terms of the winter shelter as well as the other elements, whether it's plots or plantings or predation management or potentially some feeding in some limited cases. Those will all be laid out through the development of those management plans for the property, and we'll provide that moving forward. We do anticipate, once the properties are acquired, making pretty substantial investments in the property, again, through the management funds, as well as through the federal money that we have, to hopefully bring those areas back into quality winter shelter as quickly as possible if they're not at that stage when we acquire them. And also, as I mentioned, try to manage the broader landscape in a way that's really promotes deer use year round. So I think with that, maybe I'll turn it over to David and Jerry to talk a little bit more. There's some other things on the agenda I think I'll cover a little bit later on. That sounds good.
We're going to wait and take questions at the end for those folks that want to ask questions. I do want to give you a little bit of history and some comfort on the deer management fund that I've been talking about a lot. So that fund I created back when I was on the legislative committee as part of another group that was trying to do this, almost 12 or 13 years ago. And I was unable to secure funding at this level back over a decade ago. But we established in statute this deer management account, and it has a number of protections so that when you pay into this fund, you as a sportsman know your money's protected. It's what's called a non-lapsing dedicated account. At the end of the year, some of the funds that the state has get swept, and the money goes back to the state and used possibly in a different way. This fund, it doesn't happen that way. The money stays in the account and it gets held over to the next year. The other protections that are in the account is IFW has a constitutional protection that says basically for all the fees that are generated by sportsmen, the legislature must commit the same amount to an appropriation. So they can never take our fees away. So you have this non-lapsing dedicated account, a constitutional protection, and I built in a series of protections beyond that. This money that's in this account can only be used for purchasing habitat, predation control, habitat work. In addition, you can't take money out of it for other things. Now, the position to do this is part of that mission to buy deer yards, so you can do that. But it has to be connected to restoring and protecting and managing deer. So we built in all those protections. In addition, some of the other protections are in statute that you build in at the time that you purchase the land, you put it right in the deed, you have deed protections. You have the protections of a wildlife management area that's dedicated specifically for deer as the highest priority. So in the law itself, there are a series of protections that ensure historically that this money gets spent for what we intend. Now, I also built into the fund, and we'll get to, at the very end, I'll talk to you about what I believe is an exciting announcement around the collaborative with the ACCA. This fund can accept private money. And I built that in there hoping that someday, that some deep-pocketed individual would make a donation by a deer yard. That was my reason. And you know what I've come to find is that the sportsmen and women of the state are our deep-pocketed people that are willing to pay that deer. We do so through our license fees. We do this through our fees we pay on our new ambulance deer permit system. I'm going to tell you this because I've learned this over a lifetime. There aren't a lot of people who care about deer or deer hunting. They have their own things they care about. It might be hiking, bird watching, whatever. It's always the sportsmen and women who step up and pay out of their pocket. That is just the reality. And that is, again, what's going to happen here. We as sportsmen and women, we know what the problem is, and we're going to step up again through our dollars. And this is our power. Our power is in our numbers. We're a lot like a union. When we put all of our forces together, we don't have to pay a lot. We can pay $12, or in the case of the deer management account, a portion of when you tag a deer, $2 goes into this account. But because there's so many of us, we can pay a small amount and our impact can be huge. This deer management account is crucial for the success of what we do. Because now we have this protected fund. Now we have to build a constituency to protect it in the future. And that's what the collaborative will be all about when I get to it in a minute. There's some more things that I believe Jerry and Nate can talk about related to the management of these deer wintering areas. But I want the sportsmen and women that are listening and see this on social media. You can complain all you want about paying $12 for a doe permit. But it was people like Jerry Levine in the 1980s who built the system that allows you to hunt and shoot multiple deer. It is a great success for you in southern Maine as a hunter. But the people of northern Maine, eastern Maine, and western Maine deserve the same chance. We are going to take decades to bring deer back to these regions. But it is imperative that the sportsmen and women step up and do it. And that's what this is about. This is why I've been dogging this for almost 2 decades now. Maine was different when I was a kid. It's not permanent. We just have to commit to conserving in the same areas of northern eastern Maine as we have in the southern part of the state. And that's what this is really all about. But with that, I'm going to ask Jerry to step up, talk a little bit about the DWA management, how that works, the elements of it, and how many acres across the landscape we need. You want to stay there and use the mic? I'll come up. Step on me. Like all the ones here.
Good evening. First thing I'd like to do is put a real point on this new strategy. I'm pretty excited about it because it's the first time in which an agency that has wildlife as its mission will be in charge of managing a habitat. The cooperative agreement system and alert system have that as a shortfall. When private landowners, timber companies, and now investment companies own the land, they are going to look at that timber resource, even though it's protected, as money that needs to be recouped on a certain time scale that fits the company, not the ecology of deer. So this is really the first time that we add a new strategy where an agency can go ahead and look over the long term and manage for the long term for the health of the habitat, which will provide for more abundance of deer. One of the problems when we started the any-year permit system, of course, we applied it statewide. And we realized we had to restrict doe harvest in the northern half of the state severely because our predation and recruitment just weren't matching the doe mortality. But restricting hunting opportunity does not allow enough survival for the deer herd to rebound. Habitat was also part of the problem, and without being in the driver's seat for controlling that habitat, we ended up with a fluctuating, always downward spiral of wintering habitat for deer. The third part of this, and one of the most important ones, was that we didn't do enough to control predation. Predation was occurring in wintertime on does, and the department from 1983 to 2003 had the snaring program. Where it was applied, it was effective. Still, it was a fairly small program. And after 2003, that ended. We went through a period of close to 10 years where almost nothing was done to manage the coyote predation. Starting in 2010, the department embarked on its current predation management program, and as important, individuals and organizations like the ACCA here in Aroostook County and the folks down in Washington County and northern Penobscot started taking the bull by the horns really and promoting coyote hunting and in the wintertime as a means to improve deer survival. That's essential. And I will point out that we have a lot of deer in the central and southern part of the state, but that's where we have the majority of our coyote hunting. There are probably thousands of coyotes that are killed in the central and southern part of the state. That helps to keep the deer herd thriving compared to what the case would be if there were no coyote hunting in the southern part of the state. So that element is there too. The other part of predation that's probably as big a problem, and it's a real conundrum, is that bears and coyotes together are important predators of newborn fawns. And you can have a situation biologically where so many young fawns are killed before they recruit to replace adults that the deer herd will not grow, won't even replace old age losses. And that mortality level starts at about 50% loss. During the 80s, we had an index that we used in the department to estimate fawn mortality, and we found that northern Maine's mortality for fawn was in that neighborhood of 50%. And that alone will stop the deer herd from growing. So what I'd like to reinforce is that habitat management now is going to be feasible and possible on a growing acreage that the department's going to take ownership of, and that is going to accumulate over time, over decades, so that eventually we'll have a habitat base that's more than today and an improvement certainly over what we've got today. Back in the 1950s and early 60s, the first round of biologists after the World War II era, as David mentioned, they surveyed deer yards, I think Nate mentioned. They took an inventory of the deer yards in this northern 2/3 of the state. There were almost 3,000 deer yards. These deer yards occupied about 1.2 million acres. And the deer population was thriving in the absence of predation. It was the best of all worlds for sportsmen, really. And the habitat in the northern part of the state was heavy to coniferous cover, having survived the previous bloodworm epidemic in the 19 teens and 20s. So everything was coming back at the right time back then. So how many acres of deer yard do we need to have a thriving population in the northern half of the state, or the northern 2/3? At a minimum, you probably want 5 deer per square mile. Think back to the 50s and WMD 5, or not 50s, but 1970s, early 80s, WMD 5 and 4. They had about 5 deer per square mile. And hunting was pretty good at 5 per square mile back then. It was a lot better in the 50s, but that's what we're looking at for that. To sustain 5 deer per square mile over that area there is going to take 500,000. So there's a benchmark for what the department over time can shoot for this strategy, along with the cooperative agreements that they have with towns and other things, and the remaining work yard. So we've got a long way to go, but this is a major step in the right direction.
Anything else, David? At this point, I'm going to invite Jerry McLaughlin to come up. I'm going to backtrack a little bit and have Dave come back up, and then talk about a project that has been announced here in Aroostook County. I haven't talked a little bit about that, and then the prospect of maybe some other opportunities around the state. So, Jerry McLaughlin, before I let him speak, I can tell you, I've met a lot of people in my life in politics, and you can see it in a person's eyes when they are passionate and care about something. Well, I saw it over a decade ago when I first met you, and I can tell you it's only got more intense. I can think of nobody more passionate about Aroostook County and restoring the Idiot interiors, and what a pleasure it is to work. So with that, and I'm also going to introduce you out in just a minute. Jerry.
Thank you, Dave. He didn't tell you that once you get into this, you can't sleep nights. It's a constant job. It's 24/7. But if you're passionate about it, you love doing it, not you. I want to start this off tonight by saying thank you to Dave Trahan, the Sportsman Alliance of Maine. Thank you to Nate Webb and IFW for making this happen tonight. Dave has worked, he told me, about 20 years on bringing this to this round. We, the ACCA, is on our 14th year, trying to protect and enhance our winter and deer areas. We've lost a lot of them, so we got a lot of work ahead of us. So my question tonight is, would you join us? We need your help. Join today, the ACCA, Sportsman Alliance of Maine. We need you. There's power in numbers. We also got another big thing to ask you. Donate to our future. It's called the ACWDC, Aroostook County Whitetail Deer Coalition. I think we owe it to our children and our grandchildren. So let's donate it. Help buy these deer yards and maintain them. And the one great thing is all the money that we donate here stays here in Aroostook County to buy deer yards. Most of the yards that we knew have been clear cut, gone. Any good ones? I haven't seen. A lot of deer, where'd they go? They've all come to town. Supplement feeding, we have to do it. If we don't, we're going to lose them all. There's so many deer in our towns, that's from Allagash to Oxbow, all over, Benedicta, all the way down. They all came to town because we have to feed them. Get these deer yards going, up and working, help us rebuild them, put the deer back up there where they belong. We don't want to feed them. It's a big job and it's very expensive. I'll tell you, Dave mentioned about the people up here having compassion for the deer. This year we moved about 12,000 something in feed. The people that were feeding, looking at one there, all gray and that, they donated $9,000 back to our feed bill. That's very impressive. That's how much they care. Now I'm gonna get a little rougher. Public land. They own and maintain or manage 630,000 acres in the state of Maine. That's true? Okay. Out of that 630,000 acres, 35,800 acres are zoned deer yards. The deer yards. I seen how public lands manage their land this year. I'm sure you've all seen it in our conservation laws. They went in 1,000-acre lot in Hamlin and wrote a prescription to cut 85%. What's going to be left for habitat? A group of us got on to them. We opposed it. They dropped the cut back to 50% just on that ground. But if nobody would have said something, what would have happened? I would like to propose tonight, I would like to see IF&W take control of that 35,800 acres in deer yard and have the department manage. That's what I'd like to see. Also, the ACCA myself, we've recommended Whitetail and Ashland. Also, you're familiar with that. Whitetail Road is for sale. 2,663 acres. Gabby Reel and Van Buren's got 2,137 acres for sale. Irving Woodlands, we're trying to deal with them. They own Armstrong Deer Yard in Stockholm, 7,000 acres. Hoping we can purchase that. Allagash, I know there's land up there for sale too, and we need to buy some up there. With that said, nobody's shot yet. I haven't heard something. So the ACCA will have a meeting right here again, May 20th. We have Randy Martin coming. He's going to talk about plots and planting trees. Thank you all for coming.
So I'm gonna allow me to talk a little bit about the first project that's in the works up here around the wintering area. Then I'm gonna move right into what Jerry was talking about, collaboration that's coming together with the people of Aroostook County.
Sure, and I'm gonna talk kind of generally, one thing about our real estate work, and most of what state government does, it's totally transparent, it's open for the public to see and to view and request information. Real estate transactions are one of the few things that we do that are confidential in terms of the details until the property is actually closed and changes hands. And the reason for that is that there's understandably business interests and financial interests for the landowner that we're sale with. So I'm not going to talk about any details about the properties that are likely going to be the first purchase up here, but I will sort of speak in general terms. We did apply for and receive land for future funding back in March, February, March. For 2 properties in Aroostook County, totaling just about 900 acres. So that was a successful application for that funding. We are still working on finalizing that sale, and we'll certainly announce the details and the location and everything once the sale is and it's closed. But it is pretty exciting. That will be the first project that will have occurred under this new initiative and under the new LMF bond language. We have applied for the federal funding to match the LMF portion as well, which really is kind of a really technicality that will be issued funding. So we're hopeful that will go forward and we'll be able to announce the details of that first purchase fairly soon. I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of some of the other efforts that we're working on. We have cast a pretty wide net, talking really all across that area in green. We made contact with several dozen different landowners, and we're currently in discussions that is at various stages with several landowners, multiple parcels. up to, I think the biggest one is around 6,500, 7,000 acres. There's a few others that are in the same ballpark as well as some smaller ones. So those are all in the early stages. There's a lot that goes into these purchases I mentioned earlier. We are hopeful that some of them will bear fruit and work out and announce those as well once they're completed. Part of our work in terms of acquisition is, interactions like this one and just making sure that the community, the public, the landowner community, and this sort of more than 2/3 of the state is aware that we're in the market for your moving areas. There's oftentimes land that comes up for sale with relatively short notice. There's also at times landowners that if they're aware of our interests, that sort of factor into their plans, and certainly have landowners over the years when we've acquired land for other purchases reach out to us because they know that their property is something they're interested in. So there's a combination of sort of ways that we go about acquisition. There's the direct outreach to landowner. There's certain things that people like yourselves bring to us for consideration, help those connections, and then we have landowners that reach out to us directly as well. So we're hopeful to have 1 or 2 projects in the next round of land remaining speaker funding, which is coming up in. So we're crossing our fingers. We'll have 1, maybe 2 pretty substantial projects with that effort as well. This, is really going to just sort of keep continuing. There's been a lot of legwork to get this effort up and rolling. We have that key position that I mentioned. That person, Dan Hill, licensed forester as well as wildlife biologist, actually worked for us previously in another role. He just started in January. He spent pretty much January right straight through the mid-April surveying potential acquisition, looking at your use, looking at their condition of habitat, helping informing whether it would be something that we can pursue and sort of a potential value to us as well. So a lot of work is sort of underway and has really ramped up in the past few months with the end on the effort full time. I do want to mention we also have a team of staff in Augusta that handle all of our acquisition sort of transactions. We have a full-time biologist as well as a contractor that works full-time for us that helps shepherd these acquisition projects through the state system, helps work on getting the appraisals done, and usually we have to do a survey in a lot of cases, title work. So we've got a whole team down in Augusta that works on the administrative side as well. So it is a focus for us. It is a priority. Our commissioner is very supportive. The governor is very supportive of this effort. The legislature is as well, and showed that by the appropriation of funding as well as some pretty significant investments to state law to make this effort possible. So that's kind of what I plan to share. I can't really go into details quite yet in terms of location. Some of you are probably aware, and that's fine, but I just talk about it. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Nate. So now I want to transition into, and I'll introduce you in a moment, Al, because the timing's perfect. I remember when I wrote into the law that this fund is the management fund to accept private donations, I knew in my mind that it would be helpful later. I just didn't know how. Well, today I know how. After many conversations with Jerry, I said, Jerry, this doesn't work if people in Aroostook County on the ground aren't part of this effort. You need local buy-in, you need people on the ground, letting the state know when these things are available to purchase, what kind of predation is going on, all of those things locally that could make this program successful. So we've decided to announce that we're creating an Aroostook County collaboration to restore the whitetail deer. It's in partnership with the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. We obviously have some power at the legislature. We wouldn't be standing here today. We were able to get us to where we are today with the support of the outdoor community and the department. The ACCA is also a key partner on the ground. You're committed to the same things we want. So it makes sense. Why don't we partner on this? So we've decided to create this collaboration between SAM, the ACCA, and the sportsmen and women of the state of Maine, not just Aroostook County, but people who care about restoring deer to northern, eastern, and western Maine. Now, let's stop here for a second and just tell you, our focus is deer. But this unique habitat is specific to other species as well. Like 30 or 40 different species benefit from the same habitat. If you're not a hunter, you don't care about deer, you should care about what we're doing, because that same habitat is going to be critical habitat for all those other species. In addition, these parcels, as they're purchased, the focus will be deer, but they have brook trout fisheries, they have bird hunting, moose hunting, bear hunting. They will be locations in Aroostook County where sportsmen and women and other recreational users can benefit. You see that map over there of all the LMF projects? The 1.3 million people in Maine get to benefit from most of those projects. Aroostook County has very few. These parcels, I would love to see someday that we fill in like we did in southern Maine, the same way we do in northern. This collaboration, the way it's going to work, this deer management account is key because any donations that are made into this account, if we work with the department and it's a cooperative project, is eligible for 3-to-1 federal match. Even your volunteer hours, if we coordinate, can be eligible for this 3-to-1 match. If we raise money, we've already established the account today. My office staff, Becky Morrell back there, hi Becky, has been working diligently on this. We have 4 signers on the account, 2 from SAM, 2 from the ACCA. It's going to take 2 signatures to spend the money. We formed an 8-person committee, 4 from SAM, 4 from the ACCA. We will meet, we will decide how to spend this money, and based on the decisions, a majority of those 8, all this money that we raise will be spent in Aroostook County. We don't take any administrative fees. Nothing is taken from this account except what comes back into Aroostook County. In a good faith effort, you want to join me for a second? Go ahead. Jerry called me and said, I'm willing to pony up $1,000. How about you? And then I said, well, yeah, sure. So he went out and solicited again another donation from the ACCA. So between Sam and Jerry, this account already has $3,100 in it. $3,100. Now, think about that. If we use the money wisely, it's actually $12,000 when you match it with federal money. Now, why this is important? When you have say a 2,000 acre lot, you heard Nate say earlier, said these smaller lots are not their priority. They're trying to seek the bigger chunks. That's smart because you're creating the foundation of the deer yard complex when you buy a big chunk. But what about all those little chunks around that deer yard that could benefit that same wintering? We will be in a position with cash in hand when they become available, and when the department deems them a priority, we can help purchase them using our fund. If there's a predation issue that needs to be addressed, we can use our funding. If there's a habitat improvement we want to make, we can. But if we coordinate with the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, we can do that at a 3-to-1 match. That's how you empower your individual dollar to get to where you want to be. So I think that's pretty exciting news. To be honest with you, that this is going to be a model. When we're done building this in Aroostook County, we are going to the Rangeley area, we're going to the Jackman area, and we're going down east. And we're going to say, look what the people of Aroostook County did. They showed you the path. If you want to do this, we will assist you in the same manner. For those that are business owners that are in this room, you remember when people were coming from all over the country, coming to Maine to hunt big bucks in northern Maine, with the lodging, the restaurants, and all the things that were associated with those people coming here were part of our economy. That's disappeared. Sadly, the bear guides will tell you it's really, really hard to sell a deer hunt in northern Maine when you don't have the animals for people to hunt. That's got to change. This effort is as much about conservation as it is about bringing economic activity to Aroostook County, which disappeared. and the other remaining parts of the state was needed. With that, I'm gonna stop, and then, I'm gonna let Al speak for a minute. Al's on the advisory council. I served on the advisory council in Fisheries and Wildlife around the time that the expanded archery season was created. And I remember saying to myself way back then, same thing you serve on now, holy cow, isn't it cool that we have places in Maine where we have to take multiple deer and the population is so strong. Well, now you are doing the same thing I did some 20 odd years ago now. You want to introduce yourself and what you're doing now?
Sure. I don't know that I go up there. You hear me all right? Yeah. No, probably a lot of you know me. I worked as a objector for North Maine Woods for 40 years. I've worked for the company for 45. North Maine Woods was started in 1971, the same year as Sam. I've been a life member for decades. 5 days after I retired at the end of September last fall, I got a call from folks at Long Road Energy, the windmill, renewable energy, solar group, and they're looking for somebody to be in public outreach in Aroostook County to promote a wind farm, a massive wind farm. In Monticello, Route 11, East Expo, down to Knowles Corner to Smyrna. It'll produce almost as much electricity that would come down the corridor that we voted on last November down on Western Maine. 160 turbines, 800,000 megawatts of power. So my goal is to come up with, from this project, what would the company do to benefit Aroostook County? I've got a list. I started back in December, talking with folks there, talking to most of the town councils, town managers in Bridgewater, those in Monticello, Smyrna, Hammond, Jefferson Pond. At the same time I was asked to do this, I attended the meeting with David up here and Jerry and Presque Isle, talking about the match for the Winds Remaining Futures to protect deer. So that went right off, like, geez, Aroostook County sportsmen, and I know most of the sportsmen from my job in North Maine Woods, and I know the landowners. I know most of the Maine Woods from my experience. So it kind of clicked, and the folks that I'm working for agree that that's a priority. The track is north of Baxter. There's no near the Allegheny, the Appalachian Trail, scenic lakes. It's kind of generic forest land, mostly all urban ground, 150,000 acres. I don't know how many people have been in that track. South of the St. Croix Harvey siding road. We have my family's had camp there since the 1940s. So I thought about the proposal that they wanted me to work for, and I'm looking at the whole state. That seems to fit. Oakfield has 40 turbines in the town of Oakfield. The town gets $600,000 a year from what was First Wind that developed the project in Oakfield. The same people that are working at Long Road work for First Wind. They did the Mars Hill project, the Oakfield project, Stetson Mountain, several other projects across the state. So they've had a pretty good reputation. I worked for North Maine Woods for 45 years. I don't need to work. I'm 68. And I took it on because I felt there was a lot that could happen for Southern Aroostook County. We're going to give quite a chunk to ACAP. A lot of people in rural Aroostook County that have a hard time with their electric bills and fuel bills. We're going to support the snowmobile ATV plus have trails through that area. And I don't know what the amount would be. The process was put together a proposal for the Maine Public Utilities Commission. Troy Jackson and Jay Stewart last year put in LD 1710, which was passed by the legislature. It had three components. One of them was a transmission line from southern Maine into Hammond Plantation. That proposal went into the Maine Public Utilities Commission the 1st of March. The Long Road Energy proposal for this wind project within this week. So sometime in the next 2 months, the state, the Public Buildings Commission will decide whether they're going to accept these projects or some aspect of it. It could be millions of dollars towards this program for sporting deer yards. So the project would be between $1 billion and $2 billion. There'd be 300 or 400 people working to put these together over 3 or 4 years, probably 3 or 4 years before all the permits are accepted. Probably it's 50-50 chance that this will get approved and built. But if it does, it could mean quite a lot for buying the 500,000 acres for deer. It's voted. I did get permission this morning to offer several $1,000s at this point to help generate a fundraising process, whatever you and Jerry they want to put together. I've got plans to make a donation today. I've been talking to Jerry since he met in Presque Isle back last fall. I was pretty an organization I'm working for. I'm trying to do what they tell me and keep things under wrap and trying to talk to them a little bit. And, so anyway, that's what I'm doing. Working half time. If you have any questions? I talked to a lot of people. I had one fellow opposed the windmill project, so generally we've got pretty good support from most of the communities that I talked with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Al. Just full disclosure, I didn't know anything about what Al was going to say when he came tonight. Because I would have to speak with my board as to what's been discussed, but I think that's exciting now, and I sort of have to value this. I just wanted to disclose that I didn't really know that was coming. With that, I would like to say that is a reflection of, I think, what people know up here, is that we need to do something, and we need to do something big. The fact that you could be authorized to say that so quickly, Al, in the meeting illustrates that I think the passion's out there. Now, we spoke for a long time, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I'm going to take questions, and if you direct them up here, I'll take the questions. It might be better for some of them to answer the questions, but I'm going to open it up now to questions. Mike?
I think any one of the three of you can answer this because you've been, I guess you'd say, involved in it, but the status of a pending close season on coyotes.
Yeah, I don't think that effort's going anywhere. I'll just speak from my perspective at Sam, and you can speak if you want to.
Sure. I'm sorry, could you actually repeat the question?
The pending committees that have been meeting, I know Jerry's on the committee, discussing a possible close season on coyotes.
Oh, yeah, no, there's no proposal. I mean, all kinds of ideas are discussed. We have suggestions that come to us to IFW daily on all kinds of things, but there's no discussion about it.
Okay.
Now, Mike, there was earlier,
Yes.
but it went through the committee process, and I think there was a pretty strong pushback. And I've heard a lot of different proposals over the years, and this one got rejected pretty strong. You want to add to that, David?
Well, most of it's been said. That's fine.
Right.
Well, let me make, you can clarify too. This came up as part of the department's upgrade of the coyote management plan for the next 2 years. And there were several layers of input that the department was getting from the public. There were surveys of the public. There were focus groups. The department convened a technical committee that was comprised of biologists who were not currently affiliated with the department, people who are adept at hunting coyotes with dogs, with baiting, with trapping, people who were against coyote hunting. The department listened to all of that input. And at the technical committee level, the technical committee proposed ending the coyote season sometime just before the pup rearing period and opening it back up in September. The department never committed to that but that was the current proposal that was in place. Next level of input was to convene with their stakeholder group and get their opinions on that technical committee recommendation. And that included SAM, the Maine Guides Association, the Maine Trappers Association, the Landowners Association, so on and so forth. And at that level, the department heard loud and clear, there is no support for shortening or bridging the coyote season at all. In the final analysis, the commissioner makes the final policy decision. Nate just spoke tonight saying, going nowhere.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I mean, a change like that, and thanks for clarifying, Gary. I didn't quite catch what the question was about, but no, Jerry's summary is accurate. You know, beyond the planning, after any change like that would require either a change to the department rule or state law, which goes through either the advisory council or the legislature, the governor, et cetera. So a change like that isn't something that happens easily or quickly. So, but there's no formal proposal.
So I would sincerely hope that the final coyote management plan does not have that proposal in it at all.
Well, that's good news. That's a very important point. Thank you for clarifying. So, any more questions? There must be some questions.
We introduce a clause underneath the property for spent coyotes there. Bring it back.
That's not my view.
Unfortunately, there's no way to do that. Snaring is prohibited by state law. And you're probably familiar with the history of the program and why it was prohibited. Links are listed, which they continue to be. There's not really, an option there. So, for the foreseeable future, I don't see that as a possibility.
Yeah, so a couple things, I guess, so you talked about predation on bears, and I talked to Jerry a little bit about this, but with these wintering yards, is it gonna be like other public lands where the state manages bear bait sites and the quantities beyond them and how you can get a hold of getting a site, et cetera?
Sure, I have already been in discussions with Nate about managing bear predation. I remember when I was on the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee, this subject came up around bear predation. It was around a possible spring bear season. I remember saying at the time, because I was quoted in the SAM News, who would have known I'd be the SAM director someday. Well, and my quote was, ignoring bear predation is like standing in the gallows and ignoring the hanging. Because bears are as significant a predator as coyotes, you got to do both. I know that it's a priority at SAM to work with the biologists, work with policymakers to manage bear predation through the legal seasons that we have, with my intention to push aggressively for the department as they buy these deer yards to do year-round management. And I know I've heard from the department that that's their priority. You can't just do it when it feels good or when it's convenient. You've got to manage predation. You want to just do anything?
No. In terms of the bear baits, I mean, hunting is allowed on all of our main areas. That's one of the priorities for us owning the properties, is to provide public hunting and trapping opportunities. We do allow, bear baiting naturally on our management areas with bears, which is all of our southern places where bear baits with bears. But those are managed through the regional office. We use our own system. It's a little bit different from the one that public lands uses. I will say that, most likely, depending on the size of some of these acquisitions that we hope to move forward with, we may need to look at managing the bear baits a little differently than we do in some other properties. And the reason is just the scale, the size of the properties. Most of our management areas, which again are in southern central Maine, are pretty small. And where we allow baiting, which is most of them, there's really not room for bigger bait sites. There's the potential, if we are able to acquire some large parcels, we need to use a bit of a different system. It's kind of just a permit issue by the biologist. There's not a lottery or anything like that, like public. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, we will allow fair baiting. We may need a different system. It's just a little bit more smaller properties. But it's not, these properties are not public lands. They are public owned, but they're administered and managed by
Daniel, you had a question?
Yeah, from Nick Archer. On these properties, what will the tree harvesting policy be?
So we will harvest trees, but we will do so to promote deer habitat, and that will be the purpose and the goal of the park. Effective deer wintering area management requires us to have available winter shelter and browse in the deer wintering area complex continuously. So we can't have a situation where we have this massive deer wintering area complex and you let it grow and grow and grow and all die and fall apart at the same time. So we will do timber harvest. Some of that will be pre-commercial, most likely, to help promote conifer regeneration and get it back up in cover more quickly than it might if it were unmanaged. Some of it will be commercial in the sense that we'll be harvesting mature timber in an effort to have a mosaic and rotation of quality winter shelter across the property. But again, the purpose and what will drive the timing and the extent and location of those harvests will be here, and not revenue or sort of other objectives. And that's what's a little bit different about what we're doing.
Just another full disclosure, I'll get you in a second. Is I was a self-employed logger for 36 years. I still have both my skinners. I manage a lot the same way you just mentioned. I do a lot of selective cutting. I never cut oak unless I absolutely have to. The landowner demands it. There's things that you can do in harvest that are really good for the deer. Some of the lots that I've cut on, I've managed in a way that you always have regeneration coming. When I wrote the statute, I intentionally, working with the department and Jerry, intended for the priority to be deer, managed to deer. You've got to have some of that harvesting going on. I'll guarantee you, I'll be watching everyone here as part of the coalition, these lots, we'll all be watching. I don't think IFW is a concern. There needs to be policy changes at the Department of Conservation around management of their lots. That's where we're going to be focused. And we've had good discussions with the Department of Conservation and Administration. And in the next session, there's supposed to be some report backs on some of that possible change that will occur on those lots. Number one is you can't, and as an agency, depend on cutting trees a part of the budget. You must find a way to replace the revenue that agency depends on to run the agency. And that's what we will be focusing on. That's the job of SAM. And I'm going to make a plug for both HCCA and SAM. If we didn't have a strong organization like SAM, with our membership, and I encourage you all to join, if you believe in what we're doing, it's only $25 a year to be a SAM member. I don't know what your membership is. 20. For $50 a year, you can be part of this effort. SAM can't achieve what we do, and HCCA can't, unless we have numbers. So I just need to make that pitch. So there's a gentleman back here.
Has there been any talks in legislature with the state on purchasing possibly tens of thousands of acres, and you're taking that land from private ownership, taxable land, and turning it into public ownership, non-taxable land, and what the effect is, or if there's going to be a reimbursement for the towns for that?
Sure. I'd like to address that because I did bring it up and I had some discussions with the administration around it. There's something that's called payment in lieu of taxes. Land trust will use it if they buy a piece of property, they take it off the tax rolls, they can pay the town, make an agreement with the town, pay them. And I broached the subject of going forward as we're buying these parcels, potentially doing a payment in lieu of taxes. Now, that isn't, it's not something that's been approved by the department or anybody else. But I do see the value in making such an arrangement, having that be part of the deal we make it. If a town brings forward a proposal, let's say, and it's big, they may not make that a priority, but some towns will. And we don't get to choose where we want to buy the deer yards, the deer tell us that. So we'll work through every incident that we can. Sam will be looking at changing policy to try to do this payment in lieu of taxes going forward. So we have been addressing it. There are a lot of critics of buying public lands that use that as the issue. It can be easily addressed with policy like that. I can tell you in the upcoming election, it will be part of the discussions, but there is a path forward to get to where I think maybe some people are concerned to get comfort in buying some public. What I would show you though is this. Look where we need the public land. We have a lot down in southern Maine because that's been the priority. That's where the high land values on waterfront, on rivers and on the ocean. In northern Maine, this is easier to do because the land values are not so high. So payment in lieu of taxes, particularly in the rural regions, makes a lot of sense. Just, you know, I chaired the taxation committee as a senator, and I'm very familiar with tax policy, and I can help.
On that same note, that wouldn't be an issue in unorganized territories, would it?
Well,
You still pay taxes on unorganized territory.
that's right, we do. It is still an issue, but it really depends on the community. Some communities are gonna say, boy, if you can buy a deer yard and bring the deer back here, it's gonna benefit our whole community. So it's really gonna be part of it.
Yeah, and actually, one of the due diligence things that we do whenever we're looking at an acquisition, usually it's a fairly formal process. We actually reach out to the town where the parcel is and have those conversations. Most often, the town would actually write a letter of support for our funding application. So that's part of what we do. You know, we acquire land in a municipality without having those conversations. But it is a good question for sure. One thing I just did want to mention while I have the mic real quick, and I do think it's really important not to lose sight of the private landowners. The private landowners in Maine, they're always going to be a key part of deer wintering area management. You're never going to own all the yards. You can't. Financially, staff capacity, it's just not going to happen. Maine is 94% privately owned. We're very excited by this new initiative, but we can't lose sight of the importance of private landowners and their continued collaboration on deer wintering area management. And as we go through this process of seeking out and acquiring land, there's going to be properties and parcels that just aren't a good fit for us for a variety of reasons. There might be size, there might be lack of public access, there might just not be a willing seller, which is that's sort of the most important thing, that someone actually wants to sell you the land, can't buy it, they don't want to sell it to us. So I think it's really important not to lose sight of that. We're going to do all we can to make this a success from our end, but the private landowners are still going to be very, very important, and all those efforts that we've had in place to this point are going to continue. We can offer technical assistance to landowners, and we can do that. We have some staff capacity for that. So I'd encourage this group, as you're thinking about your involvement in this initiative, to continue to think about the private landowners, and there may be opportunities for this group even to financially bring resources to the table for lands or properties that aren't owned by our agency. It's got to be part of the full package. The other thing, and I won't go into this as much at all because we are going to be having a discussion with public lands about deer wintering area management specifically, but I just didn't want to say while I have the mic that we do have a full-time wildlife biologist that works for ISPW, who wears our uniform, assigned full-time to public lands. They do a lot of great work. Their management goals are different in many cases than what ours are, but they are a critically important partner. Again, we're going to be talking to them about deer wintering area management in particular as part of the outcome of the legislature's discussion on that topic last winter. But they do great work. I have a lot of respect for public lands. I think it's a matter of talking about what the management objectives are, which again, for us that are a little bit different than really the public lands. So.
To that point, yeah, I did appreciate that point. To that point, there's a process that the Department of Conservation uses for input from the public. When we create our collaboration with the Aroostook County ACCA, one of the things we're going to do is ask the Department of Conservation to teach us how to use that process. You get to say before a harvest what you think should happen on that property in your area. I want to learn how to use that system. I want to have input. And if we can't have a positive input into that system, maybe it needs to change. But we have to educate ourselves on how to be effective in advocating for the things that we care about. And in addition to that, what Nate just said about those discussions with conservation, I did have several conference calls with the administration at the highest level, in which I thought was very receptive. There's some people there that understand this issue, and I thought that the talks were productive. So I'm going to wait and see what the two agencies come up with. But I do feel like there's been some progress in that discussion. So that was
I've got 23 questions.
Just 23?
No, actually, is there any way, Jerry, or is there any way that you guys can take control for their management of the public lands and the manage it for the benefit of the deer herd?
So, as I mentioned, we work with them really closely. So I'll spend just a couple minutes talking about, I actually spent a year in that position, the academic biologist assigned to public lands. So I've got some familiarity with it. Full disclosure, my brother is a forester in public land on this part of the state. So I have a really high opinion of them, despite the fact that I have family that works for them. But they do, basically they have what's called an integrated resource policy, and they have 3 primary management objectives. And in fact, it might be good at some point to have them talk to this group, but those are timber management, wildlife, and sort of ecological values and recreation. So their entire land base is sort of laid out into one of those 3 areas of priority. A significant portion of their land base is allocated to wildlife as the highest priority. And it's on those acres, that portion of their land base, that our full-time staff person, he's a wildlife biologist as well as a licensed forester, works very closely with them on management planning, harvest description, all of those sorts of things. But again, and I think as was brought up earlier, it's like 600,000 acres. So in areas of the state or areas of their land base where the primary focus and goal for management is timber harvest, wildlife are still a priority and a focus, but we do have less involvement. Our focus is on deer yards. We have some other areas of managed for other species collaboratively with Whitetail. So sort of a long-winded answer, but we do work very closely with public lands in the Allagash area on those public lots. I've spent time on those lots when I was in that position. But there's some nuances. They are, as an agency, dependent on timber revenue to fund their program. I think David has brought that up and raised that as a potential concern, and I think that will probably be a topic of conversation in the next few months. We have started working with public lands just over the past few months, actually using some of the deer management count funding to assist them with deer habitat management on some of their land base. And that's something that is new. We haven't done that previously. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity for us to work collaboratively with lands on deer living area management, potentially bring some resources to the table, financial resources, expertise, while also taking advantage of their staff and their foresters who know land on the ground for time. So kind of a long-winded answer, but we do work with them, and I foresee that increasing and expanding.
We're having, there's even more public lands. This is a lot of the way you guys want to manage the land. It's not really for the money you're going to get, but it's coming more for deer habitat. you know, just when make a big cut over where Barry was talking about cutting 80% of it. And that area is gone forever for, you know, for deer men. So the question is there any way that you guys could take it and have it cut the way you guys are going to your men? Since it's owned by the state.
Yeah, so I could actually talk about Round Pond.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Sam's perspective. Organizations like mine, our job is to help shape policy, not for promotion of Sam, but promotion of things that our community cares about. We were able to make significant progress in this discussion about exactly what you're trying to get at. Our discussions with the administration were very productive. But it's our job at SAM, if we want to make policy change, we introduce legislation. Troy Jackson did ask us to work with him, but we ran out of time on a bill to do something similar to what you're talking about. But that we have to be really careful. The department can't engage in the policy making political part of it. They just really take direction from the committee and the legislature and the governor. So it puts them in a really delicate position when you ask me, can you do this? Really, it's up to SAM in our community to push the policy change. Timber harvesting in my part of the state for money is not as big an issue. It is with the people who recreate for hiking, bird watching. They're the folks that show up and really, complain and whatever. But up here, we all know that when you lose deer habitat, it's critical because there's so little left. And that's why it's so sensitive up here. And I think the government has to catch up with what the priorities are for the communities affected by the harvest. And that's what you're seeing now is a maturity of that very thing happening in front of us. We lost all these deer yards, what few are left, we're all sensitive to when they get cut. So it's up to us partially to take responsibility, Sam and you and the rest of you, to take this, use the force of our influence to make policy change. That's my answer to this question.
Well, yeah, and that point is sometimes when it takes too long to do that, the good idea has already been counted. Yeah, but to what you said a while ago with cooperative deer, with the landlords. What we've done in Allegash is 2 years back, we had a cooperative deer in Allegash. And what we've done is in our town is we passed an ordinance where everything that was in the cooperative deer yard is a conservation. So it would be more restricted on cutting now. That's kind of like an Allegash. That's kind of like having a speed limit, cop to enforce. I mean, that's in our town because it's kind of exactly what has happened to the state. In our town, we had almost 4 benefits. And everything in the comprehensive plan was for the enhancement of wildlife first before anything. But fell by the way and that was it. And because now we're having this discussion of deer being found. They never were before. So along the little black area, there's deer habitat. It's deer cover, it's not habitat. Because the deer, there's no place up there that's the deer yard. There's a place where the deer can get under cover and that's it. And what Gary said, this year I spent about $1,700 and had some little bit of it. But I spent personally about $1,700 for next year. The price of everything in the month would be $2,000 for 80 deer behind the house. Last year was more than that. And last week, the last 50 were finally, thank God, black. But the thing about this is overnight, they don't want to feed the people, but overnight they left. But there's nothing else for the people there. So the other question I had is there any way that out of license fees or like some fees, that there could be a donation made to ACCA or money from the state to feed these deer until the long term of the deer yard comes into effect, what you guys are trying to do? Because if we don't have the supplemental feeding program through the years, then sometime pretty soon someone else is going to have to take over doing it. But the thing about it is if there's not some program by the state to take over doing it, or if the state could do that, have some places or some people designated to do that. By the time that we get to the deer yard, there's going to be no deer.
I understand your point. I don't have been on the committee for 11 years, watched the policy, 11 years as SAM director and lobbyist. I can tell you It's a difficult fight to get the department to take over deer control. But there is a better way, I think. What we talked about creating this collaborative in Aroostook County, by putting all of our forces, business, sportsmen and women and people who care together, companies that are going to be generating energy, those sorts of things. If we can take this fund we're talking about creating tonight and build that fund, you don't need to ask the state to do it. We will have the resources to do it. Now, we have complete flexibility to spend the money the way we want. If Jerry calls me and says, we have a 200-acre parcel, we'd love to buy it. Can you talk with Nate, figure out if this works, a regional biologist, do that. But if Jerry calls me up and says, we have to spend $5,000 up in here in Allagash, we don't have to ask permission. We have 8 people on this committee that make that decision. We will make that decision ourselves. But what I'm talking about doing is the same thing that defines the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. I remember speaking to down in Maryland, to a group of unions from all over the country. And a lot of them were asking what I was doing there. And I said, well, if you think about it, Sportsman's Alliance of Maine is exactly what you are, a union. We took all of our forces together and joined an organization to promote the mission of all of us. To protect our brook trout, to hunt, to fish, to trap, all those things. Collectively, our burden gets less the more people that we convince to be part of our team. That's what this is about. I hope someday that everyone in Aroostook County understands what we're doing. And the amount of money that you're going to have to pay is going to get less because you have more on your team. That's how a union works. That's really what I'm talking about here. Putting our forces together and using them for good. And I understand your pain because I fed deer too. I had 26 of them, my wife and I, wading down through the snow with buckets of grain. It started at 2, grew to 12, then it grew to 26. We started looking at each other and said, how can we do this? So I understand your pain, but I think we have a better way than to ask the department to do it. We can do this now. We don't have to worry about trying to change policy. So
I trade thirty.
that was my first one. Well, don't forget, I had 6 other people within a 5-mile radius also feeding deer. So they were all feeding all these deer, and it just didn't make any sense. But it was very expensive and a lot of work.
I have a question on land that you acquire.
Yep.
That have leases on it and camps. What would become of those leases and camps?
Oh, I don't think it affects them at all. It doesn't affect them at all. No, it won't affect them at all.
It wouldn't affect them at all because they do generate revenue.
Yes, they do, absolutely.
We actually have quite a few situations like that. I mean, we have property we lease for agricultural purposes that came with the property we acquired at camps. So that's pretty standard for us.
One other question, just kind of I know it's looking around here, I noticed it. Not exactly a lot of spring chickens in here. What can we do to promote these young kids and younger population, because there's not very many members, right? To participate in this.
Yeah. How do you get more young people involved? When I came to Sam 11 years ago, there was a plaque on the wall, Portland Press Herald story. And George Smith, who was still healthy at the time, now passed. The whole story was about how I was going to change the direction of the Sportsman's Alliance name to be more family and youth oriented. Because I recognized when I was 30 years old that the people who hunted and fished, especially hunted and trapped, were disappearing. They were aging out. So we built a 112-acre education center that we do not charge any child to use. We teach everything from trapping to hunting and fishing. We're partnering with the department and other organizations that are full this summer. We've already got a dozen or so youth programs scheduled. We've been promoting very similar projects in fish and game clubs around the state. The parents who used to pass the skills on to the next generation, we're losing that. There's a disconnect there. Somebody has to fill that. And the only way I feel you can do that is hands-on, to mentor, to work with those kids when maybe somebody in the family does. I know all of us are committed to that, but I will tell you, it's hard, labor-intensive work, and it's expensive. I know we probably put $250,000 into our education center, but if we don't, who will? And that all of us, I would say, in your own worlds, you can impact some young people. Again, using our numbers. If we can all pick a child now and then and mentor them, the next generation of hunters, it can make a difference. And I know Becky is proof of that, because for years, some of us helped mentor her. And how many years have you taken now, Becky? Three. Our son, I'm taking him under my wing this fall, and I'm gonna mentor him. All of us take a young person, a new hunter, a new fisherman, a new trapper, and mentor them. Because really, ultimately, down the road, if we don't have a replacement of our numbers, our power will dwindle. And the things that we care about will disappear.
My daughter's 16th birthday, or not my daughter, my granddaughter's 16th birthday is a request to come to deer camp.
You are one lucky
That will
man.
be granted. It will be granted because I took her out this year, last year. I got her first rifle, camaraderie. Spent many a day showing her the use of the rifle, on her safety. And her next goal is to come over and take over Tom Ward's job.
Well, you're one lucky person, because I've come to find that when I mentor, I'm thinking I'm gonna help that person, but it helps me. I get a huge reward from teaching somebody how to hunt and fish, to learn boating skills like your son. Those things are as rewarding for you as they are for the child. I can tell you that. Is there any other pleasure? Well, this gentleman hasn't asked.
This has with coyote predator. The guys that hunt with dogs, do they have to get permission from the landowners now to hunt on their property?
No, that hunting bill you're talking about, the way it works is, if your dog ends up on somebody's property, they make a complaint. You've got so many complaints before you get summons. If a landowner doesn't want you there, they have to let it know that they don't want you. So this bill was controversial. It was one of the most painful pieces of legislation I've ever worked on. I worked on a lot. In the southern part of the state, with coyote hounding in particular, and bear hounding in northern and eastern western Maine, more and more landowners are objecting to hounds being used on their property. That's created a real conflict. There was an original proposal to make it trespassing for any dog to show up on private property. Our role was to get rid of that, because that would have affected beagles, bird dogs, everything. So we were able to narrow it down to coyotes and bears. We'll see how this bill is going to work. But the last thing that I want to see happen is that coyote hounders stop doing what they do, because we need them. When you have a deer yard and there's serious predation going on, those hounders are going to be key to helping to manage predation. So I was troubled by what happened, but the political process is what it is. But we needed to do something.
Well, we need it, but we don't need dog baiters baiting 300 yards from a guy with a shack. And they're starting to come out of the big woods now and they're coming on everybody's property. Jerry had trouble, I had trouble. And they don't care. I mean, I talked to a guy, Matt Stidman, who runs Irving. He says, no, they're not gonna bait there. I talked to the guys and gave them their phone number. You think they'd call? Never call. They don't really care.
Well, there is a law in the books. That's, like I said, we needed to do something. But I didn't want it to include the beagles and the waterfowl dogs like they originally proposed. So it was very controversial. But we have a bill on the books.
Can you win them before time?
Yes.
And just a question about when you buy that. If you're buying land, say $1,000. If the landowner wanted, say they wanted 1,200 acres, and you could convince the landowner that you would give them 1,000, that they could use the other 200 as a contribution, a tax deductible contribution, is that something you guys?
Interesting concept. I
question.
Like
I
that
don't
idea.
know that I know the answer. As I mentioned, we can't pay above appraised value. You know, occasionally we do have owners that intentionally, sell to us property below appraised value. We call it a fire sale. I believe that there is an ability for them to, use that as a tax deduction, but I'm not positive, so I guess I'll leave it at that.
Well, for instance, like with our state rate, if you bought a house and they wanted 1,500 and you said, well, we can give you only 1,200, but the process of and use it as a tax. It would look like they would contribute an extra $300 there.
Yeah, I know, chaired the taxation committee that, the appraised value, if you sell it for less, you can definitely get that. But the problem is if you go higher, every landowner's gonna ask more than what it's worth, so they can get their tax rate. So that's gonna be the criticism. But there are more creative ways to get where you wanna be. You can sell some of the acreage specifically for deer, keep the other more expensive parcel so that you don't drive the price up. There's a number of things you can do in the negotiations. But what I think is you should let Nate and his crew try for a year or two, see what kind of success you have. And what I think is all good. I think there are parcels coming on the market for this purpose, and I feel good about what's happening. But down the road, if we need to, we will change the policy. We'll submit legislation to more incentivize in whatever way. We're not giving this effort up.
Well, the question that I really wanted to ask you is, are you guys planning on buying the area?
If it comes available, I'll be pushing for it, but I can't speak for it.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking all across northern Maine and, certainly, we're interested in anywhere that's got deer and the deer shelter, so I'll leave it at that.
Go ahead.
Well, as helping all, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, so if you think they ought to be buying land in Allagash, then other friends and sort of that area. And squeak.
Yep. Right. Gentlemen.
Just a question on this gentleman who talked about a wind farm, turbines, we want to talk about mountains, and we're talking about deer yards, the deer yard down in the lowlands. So what's the deal there? I don't quite understand that idea.
Sure.
Yeah, the windmill company is gonna have to go through environmental impact. And there is a deer, support deer in northern Maine. There's not gonna be any turbines that will affect any of the wintering areas, regardless of what the state says. They're not gonna hurt the deer population. The relationship that I was talking about is, like the town of Oakfield, they get $600,000 a year every year for 20 years. So it'll be the money part of it, the bioland, deer wintering. That's the relationship with the windmills and deer.
Yeah.
They won't be buying any land, they'll be leasing them for sites. They're gonna be 150,000 acres primarily on Irving land, and that lease is pretty well signed with Irving. Put the turbines on their property.
Exactly.
Yeah, they'll be on the elevation, of course.
Right.
That'll be environmental impact.
Yeah, I can address that. I had several meetings with the DEP around what's called mitigation. When energy projects, any project for that matter, comes up of any size, there has to be a mitigation process. IFW, DEP, and other agencies that are impacted by the project do a review for their impact on wildlife, wetlands, and whatnot. I've been talking with the DEP and others about mitigating wildlife habitat, and particularly my concern is around solar, because after a solar project is put in, they fence around it with an 8-foot fence. Well, wildlife can't get through that fence. So we've been talking about ways to mitigate the impacts on wildlife to reduce the negatives. Same way with wind. If a wind project comes up, those agencies evaluate it, and they say to the company, in order to get your permit, you need to mitigate the damage wetlands and other important natural resources. So that process will occur. I have confidence that because we've made deer a focus, any of these projects are going to take into consideration any impact on deer. And I will be pushing it very, very hard.
That was very clearly, this morning when I talked about coming to the meeting, I made it very clear that they have no intention of impacting deer.
What I'm hearing is you might want to invest in helping in a positive way. So,
Can your company put some windows across White's house?
Boy, you got those here.
Report on the back and I'll put that week,
He's definitely creative.
I've had that happen.
But, yeah, we're gonna take a couple more questions.
Just just for the future, say a piece of land we're buying in Aroostook County is gonna be cut 20, 30 years, whatever percentage. Does the money from that stay in the county?
I don't believe so, but it might be a creative amendment to the law. That might be something we would consider. I think it does stay in the region.
So is your question, if this property were owned by IFW, what would happen to the
I just don't want to see somebody like, now we'll mention the governor. The past governor, sometimes when they gotta make money, they sell their friggin' land and the money goes back into the pool.
Right.
They wouldn't be so inclined to do that if they knew the money went back into the program.
Right, so any revenue that we generate through timber harvest on any of our wildlife management areas goes back to the program. That's part of how it's structured. So if we have a harvest and we have a few underway right now, all that money goes right back.
Okay, that sounds fair.
Is that the same process that works for public lands?
It's similar. So, ours is tied to a federal grant. So we have a federal grant, the Pitt and Robertson Fund, that we use for our land management program. That requires 25% match. Basically, we use any revenue from timber sales as a portion of that match. So that guarantees that it stays within the program. The way that public lands is, they're essentially self-funded. So the timber revenue goes into a public lands account, which they use to fund, recreation, trails, campsites, the wildlife work that they do on their land base, all those things come out of that public account. The primary source of revenue is sales or sales from the
I want to speak to something that's had a little discussion tonight, why this collaboration is so important. If your concerns are the future and what happens to these lands after like yourselves take partial ownership, it means you're going to be working with the regional biologist, with me and with the agency. Anything that's happening on that land, you're going to know about. You're going to know about a cutting operation and why they're doing it. You're going to be talking with the regional biologist about how you can help. If you establish that kind of relationship, you're a partner in the project. That's going to be your accountability level. And we need to sustain that kind of effort over time. As we become more successful at this, let's say we own 50,000 acres of deer yards. If regionally people have ownership, it is your greatest advocacy. If you know as well as I do, Nate, when you have a public lot that the locals have invested in, they have love for, they will protect it like a hound dog. And that's really what we're talking about doing here, is just really becoming partners and taking ownership and assisting in the restoration of deer. So with that, I'm gonna take one more question, but I'm gonna make a pitch. In order for us to pull this off, the ACCA, Sam and you, we're gonna need membership, we're gonna need political influence, and we're gonna need money. We're gonna schedule at least an annual fundraiser and a mailer, more education work here in the county. We're gonna be talking to businesses. The more money we have in that account, more influence we're gonna have. I just make a pitch. You can join the ACCA, you can go online and join the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. We keep you informed. That's the way to be effective. So with that, one more question. Well, maybe two, because you've asked about 20. How many did you say you had? You got 4 left, you got one more, and then I'm gonna ask this gentleman.
I just wanted to, guys contacted her?
Yes, that's all we can speak to, yes. There's been discussion, both of them. I can't speak to what they said.
I was just curious, let's say we have a 3,000 acre parcel that we acquire. We're gonna manage the wildlife. How do you, what's your vision on access as far as roads? How's that gonna be developed, and the cost, who's gonna pay for that, where's that money gonna?
Well, I know I wrote the statute, so I can tell you there's built-in money in an LMF bond package, not bond package, but an appropriation. There's money there for the management plan. There is direction to develop reasonable access to the property. You have to, because that property may be crucial in the wintertime. There's a tremendous amount of resources on that property that can be used year round. As a sportsman, I'm just as interested in the brook trout fishery that's on those lots and the partridge hunting as I am managing deer. So I'm hoping that the local communities will take ownership year round, not just the deer.
Yeah, I mean, we provide public access to all of our areas, parking, road network, and we also, we build roads for management purposes. We're gonna act as management property. So, yeah, that's just part of it, and we use the deer management fund, the federal fund sources that we have for all that work. Thank you.
I'm gonna ask Jerry, you want to have the last word?
Did I hear somebody say that they're gonna donate $2,000 tonight?
Heard something like that. You have the last word.
Somebody said 10.
Yelling back at me. Yelling back.
Hey, guys, I dug in my pocket, let's everybody dig in there. We want this to work for the future, our grandchildren, great grandchildren, let's support it, let's get it done. Thank you.
With that, I'm gonna wrap this up now. I'd like to thank all of you. It's been a long night. I think we've answered all your questions. You can reach out to me, email me at my office. Jerry, Nate, we're all behind what we're doing, so you have a friendly audience. Ask your questions. With that, thank you.
So with that, folks, thank you very much for joining us. And remember, please join the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. Please join the Aroostook County Conservation Association. And please join your local Fish and Game Club, wherever that may be. As you see here, it's about power in numbers. So get those memberships, and thank you, everybody. Until next time, we'll see you again.